I am Councilmember Priscilla Tyson and Chair of the Zoning Committee. Before getting started, I want to make everyone aware that this hearing is being recorded for rebroadcast on CTV, the Columbus Governmental Television Channel 3. The rebroadcast schedule is available at www.columbus.gov. The purpose of this afternoon's hearing is to share with the public information about the Department of Building and Zoning Services fee schedule changes and provide a brief summary of code changes that will occur as a result of the state legislature approving medical marijuana. The Building and Zoning Services Department, under the leadership of Director Scott Messer, has performed a very thorough review of the current fees that are charged and the changes that are necessary to keep the department viable. While most department budgets are funded by the city's operating budget, Building and Zoning Services is one of the few exceptions. The department is funded from the fees paid from various services and permits that it offers. I believe the current fee proposal strikes a balance of recouping the department's costs, but also not charging fees that are egregious or would potentially prohibit projects. In the review process, the department considered benchmarks such as what peer cities charge. As you will hear in the director's presentation, the department has reduced zoning fees where possible, better aligned residential permit fees with cost of construction, and considered the project size when it comes to the cost for commercial and multifamily permit fees. As I am sure the director will also point out, fee changes are typically made every 5 years. This is a factor that Building and Zoning Services also had to consider in the department's projections. The proposed fees account for the current and future needs of the department. Once the director concludes his presentation on fee schedule changes, a brief summary of the code changes that will be made due to medical marijuana will be provided. Please keep in mind the medical marijuana code changes have been made based on what the state requires. I will now transition to today's presenter, Director Scott Messer. The director is accompanied by Michael Bowen, Building and Zoning Services Deputy Director, and Anthony Celebrezzi, Building and Zones Assistant Director. Mr. Bowen, Mr. Celebrezzi may assist in responding to any of the questions. Director Messer, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Councilmember Tyson. First of all, I do want to thank you and your staff for all the assistance and help that you provide us, not only on the fee schedule, but as our representative on council. It's a pleasure to work with you and your team, and getting through this has made that a lot easier, so thank you. As you mentioned, I do have Anthony Celebrezzi and Mike Bowen with me, and there may be, as you said, some questions that they might better answer, and I'll defer to them. But if it's okay with you, we'll just get started with a presentation that I have here. And essentially, I wanted to indicate that Building and Zoning Services, as you mentioned in your introductory comments, we are completely supported by the fees that we collect, and we're not a part of the general fund. That's the way the fund was set up. It's that way from the auditor's office. The dollars that we collect cannot be spent on general fund purposes throughout the city and remain in the Department of Building and Zoning Services. All of our fees are codified, and they're set out by reference to a fee schedule in the Columbus City Code. And as you mentioned, typically we review those fee schedules every 5 years. So our last fee schedule change would have been in 2014. So in 2014, the fee schedule update did not raise fees. We were lucky enough to be in a position where it was not necessary to continue to maintain our operations to increase fees. What that means is, essentially, we were able to even cut a few of our key fees back in 2014. And so we've gone a decade without any fee increase to customers by and large. As expenses have continued to increase, though, at this point, we are recommending that a fee increase would be needed to take us from 2019 and maintain the department through 2023. The overall impact, which is the last bullet on the slide, that we would see in the revenue increase that we're recommending would be 15% So although fees will be actually decreased for many customers, overall, the revenues to the department would be, we would see a 15% increase. The majority of those increases would be a result of fee increases for large-scale commercial projects. You can see on the next slide, why is that? Why are we focused on fees for large-scale commercial projects versus some of the residential and smaller scale projects? It was based on an analysis that we did. As you mentioned, when we looked at our fee schedule update, we looked at 3 key areas. We do look at reimbursement, so we look at the services that the department provides, and we try to align the costs and the fees that we charge for those purposes. Just a strict reimbursement model for the time and the expenses for the department providing services. We also look at a cost of construction model. Permit fees are typically, in a lot of cities, are based on the overall cost of construction. So generally, cities would target somewhere between 0.5% and 1.5% of construction costs to be only related for permits. As an example, a project with a construction cost of $2 million might pay $20,000 for all of the building permit fees all in, which would be the 1% target. So we did look at that and compare our fees to other cities and to the cost of construction. And then finally, it's the peer city benchmarking model. So we looked at 7 cities: Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dublin, Indianapolis, Nashville, New Albany, and Pittsburgh, as cities that would be comparable to Columbus, both on a regional basis, and then obviously a couple of those cities are more local here, to get an idea of where our fees would be benchmarked against those cities. So all 3 of those analyses were done to come up with the recommendations that we've provided. And you'll see that as we analyze those 3 areas, just to give a brief overview, generally, I can tell you that our fees are very well aligned with the services that the department provides in the recommended fee schedule changes. For example, 81% of the expenses of the Building and Zoning Department relate to building permits only and additional inspections. And similarly, 80% of our revenue would come from those fees. Some of the other services we provide, such as zoning and some of the other types of permits we issue, as well as licensing and registrations, those account for the remaining 20% of our revenue and are also aligned with the charges with the expenses. When you move on to cost of construction, that's where we had some key areas where we felt needed to be addressed. Currently, the average new construction commercial permit is only 0.14% of the cost of construction, as opposed to that sort of 1% target. Essentially, 1/6 of what we really could be charging. It's one reason why the larger commercial project fees we're recommending to increase those, to better align those. Residential and small business customers, they average above the 1.5% target percentage, and this is why we're recommending to decrease those fees. So cost of construction certainly allowed us to make some recommended changes. Peer cities also, if you look at our peer cities, the City of Columbus residential permit fees, they're about 31% higher than the average of our peer cities. So that's one reason why we're recommending to bring those fees down in this recommended fee schedule to better align those. Contrast that with large commercial new construction permit fees, and we are 208% lower than our peer cities on average, which shows you we are probably undercharging those customers on a comparative basis for this particular analysis. So all told, with those 3 models, that's why you're going to hear or see that our recommended changes are to decrease fees for small businesses and residential customers and increase fees on our largest commercial projects. Moving on to the next slide, fee changes, as I mentioned earlier, would generate 15% more revenue annually based on current permit levels. Fees would be lowered for the residential alterations and medium to small commercial projects and multifamily permits. It would be the permits for larger construction that would see a cost increase. The permit fee cap for mega projects would change. Currently, we have a cap of $20,450 on mega projects. And we would be moving that to $50,000. While that may seem like a large increase, going from $20,450 to $50,000, these are only on the largest multi-million-dollar projects, and even the $50,000 would still represent a third the average cost of our peer cities. So while we are moving that number substantially as a percentage-wise, we're still very much under market when you look at other sister cities. Under the proposed changes, 30% of residential permits, 60% of multifamily building permits, and 70% of our smaller commercial projects would all see a fee decrease. The proposal would reduce zoning and variance fees as well by about 20%. And by and large, licensing and additional inspection trips would stay constant, with some minor changes to our site engineering fees. So in summary, as I mentioned to start, without going into exact fees, just because every project is different, essentially what customers would see as a result of our proposed changes are substantial decreases on a lot of our residential and small businesses in terms of their permit fees, and some increases on our largest commercial projects that would offset those decreases and ultimately set in at a 15% increase in our fees overall.
Director Messer, I know that I think you've received some questions, and I think in our office has too, in regards to our churches and religious facilities. And so how will these changes affect the religious facilities?
So thank you for your question, Council Member. Essentially, those would fall into the category of where most of them, depending on what services they're looking for, would see fee decreases. So as a smaller entity, typically, their building permits would be lower, and most substantially would be zoning and any variances that are required, which quite often some of our churches and other charitable organizations offer some unique services in their facilities, and oftentimes need to go through a process to make sure that if they're running a food pantry or running some sort of other operation, that that's approved through the building department. Those fees for those kinds of variances and zoning related changes, as well as any permits necessary, would all be decreased under the new fee schedule.
Thank you. Also, have you shared the proposed fee schedule with individuals and businesses that are typically using building and zoning services?
Yes, Councilmember Tyson. I would like to point out that we have a codified Building Services Review Committee, which is a representative committee that we meet with monthly in the Building and Zoning Services Department. The purpose of which is to maintain good communication and input from the industry. And so that committee is made up of a variety of members, a cross-section of our customers, so contractors, architects and engineers, the BIA has a representative, the Builders Exchange, the Association of General Contractors has a representative. So we meet regularly, and we have had several meetings to discuss the fee changes and our recommendations, get their input. They've gone out to their organizations and provided input back to us. So we've had a very interactive process throughout coming up with this fee schedule with the industry representatives. After today's hearing, we also have a couple of more opportunities where we're going to be out sharing these changes with some of those specific organizations in more detail with some of their members.
And these fees would take effect in 2019, so anyone who has projects currently that was still within 2018 will not be affected by these projects.
That is correct.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Well, I certainly do appreciate the work of yourself and your team to be able to look at the reimbursement model, the cost of the construction model, and of course the peer city benchmarking model. I think you've done your due diligence in presenting a fee schedule that would certainly be one that I know I would be supporting as your council chair. And I also just appreciate that there really has not been an increase in 10 years. I mean, there have been maybe some minor things, but largely for 10 years. So I thank you for that.
And Council Member, if I might just point out a couple of items with respect to our department. We are continuing, even though we are recommending a slight fee increase that will take us through the next 5 years, we continue to strive to make improvements to be the most efficient, well-run building department that we can possibly be. In recent years, we've made tremendous strides on becoming more technologically advanced. Almost all of our permits are available online now. We probably process 60 to 65% of our permits electronically now, so customers can save time by not having to drive down to our facility. We've digitized over 5 million records so that customers can have access to digital copies of plans and permits into perpetuity, whereas we used to have to maintain all of those paper copies. We've moved into a new facility, as you know, and have a state-of-the-art customer service center where we can provide high levels of customer service to our customers. And I just want to point out that it's yes, a fee increase, but it is also aligned with our vision for the future of continued improvements, both on a technology and an efficiency and a customer service standpoint.
And I'm absolutely sure that the individuals and businesses that utilize your services are very pleased with the efficiency of your services and certainly being able to use technology. So I just came back from a conference and just listening to some of the developers that were in the room. I went to National League of Cities Conference, and one of the presentations was really about how effective and efficient the building and zoning department, if that is run very well, how that helps your city to be able to meet all the customers' needs and continue to have a growing and thriving city. And so certainly, I just truly believe that based upon you and your team, that's what we have in Columbus. So you stand with the best. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I would like to move on. I know we had a couple of other slides with pieces of legislation that aren't directly related to the fee schedule. You mentioned earlier some zoning changes under the medical marijuana law that has recently passed, and I just wanted to give a brief summary of those changes that we're recommending. So the changes that we're recommending, Councilmember, just basically clarify the various zoning districts where medical marijuana operations are permitted to be in. So currently we have a variety of districts, zoning districts, that may apply, and so we're codifying and spelling out very specifically that cultivators would be allowed in the M1, and M2 manufacturing district. Processors similarly would be in the M1, and M2 manufacturing district. The dispensaries would be in C4 commercial district, and the testing laboratories would be in the C2 office commercial district. All of those districts align with essentially what the various operations would be for medical marijuana. Obviously, the cultivators are growing the marijuana. The processors are changing it into the various products, whereas the dispensaries are going to be the customer-facing entity, and the testing labs are more in the C2 office commercial district. We also are providing a definition for each of those 4 operations that I just mentioned, as well as requiring that medical marijuana dispensaries obtain a special permit through the Board of Zoning Adjustment prior to operation. So we have a number of different types of operation in the city, such as recycling facilities and other entities that typically need a special permit from the BZA, and we're adding medical marijuana dispensaries to that list. They would have to show that they are no more than 500 feet from another dispensary. They would have to provide notification to property owners within 250 square feet. They would have to contact applicable area commission or civic associations and give them a company introduction, background, their planned opening date, their operating hours, and any emergency contact information. This really allows us to have a public process where anyone who's wanting to become an active dispensary in the city of Columbus could have some accountability for these items through the need to obtain a special permit through the BZA.
Director Messer, and so I know that so if these individuals come to a community and a area commission or civic association were to say, we don't want this in our community, what's their process?
Thanks, Councilmember, for that question. So right now, their process would be to work through the BZA and through our department as the special permit application is made to express whatever concerns they have, and whatever issues they have would be done through that public process. So while it's not an absolute, vote yes or no for a community, we wanted to ensure that our community partners had input and had an opportunity to dialogue and express whatever issues they have and work that out through a public process.
And so would a community still have the opportunity to vote it down?
They would not have a vote. They would basically have an opportunity to express whatever concerns they had at the BZA hearing for the special permit.
Okay, thank you. Go back to that, because this could come up.
Yes.
So you're basically saying, based upon the statement, the qualifications you just mentioned, once that's done, they will then pretty much automatically get this permit.
So just to clarify a couple of things, that assumes certain things that may or may not be the case. So for example, I just went through the zoning districts. So certainly if a medical marijuana, one of those entities were requesting to operate in a district other than those zoning districts for which it's approved, they would need to rezone or get a variance, which would be subject to the process that you manage now, going through the area commissions and getting a recommendation from them, and going through that process just as any other entity would if the zoning doesn't match. If the zoning is approved and they're in a zoning district that wouldn't need to be changed, they would be treated like any other business that essentially has a right to operate under that zoning district. What we were able to do in this case, because we know there may be some concern on neighbors or some of the area commissions that represent them, is to create that special permit process. As I said, there are some other entities, operational, different businesses that we've also chosen to treat that way. So as I mentioned, recycling facilities, some other facilities that require special permits, it operates similarly. You can't just preclude those businesses, but allowing for that input is essential, I think.
Thank you.
And then I did have one last slide, and it's another piece of legislation that we have proposed that I just wanted to touch base on at this hearing, which is some firearm sales in residential district change that we're making. It's essentially our current Columbus zoning code provides for limited home occupations, essentially running a business out of your residential home, in several sections across the residential zoning code, and we're just wanting to clarify in those sections that the sale or transfer of any firearms would also be prohibited as a part of any home occupation. In other words, the sale or transfer of a firearm is prohibited in any residential home. That's already the case. All we're doing is clarifying that essentially would not be permitted out of a residential home. You could not sell firearms to retail customers.
Just like you're not supposed to, you're running a business out of a residential home.
That's correct. It's not a commercial district, it's a residential district.
Right, okay. All right, I don't have any questions regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I hope this hearing has been helpful in providing information about the fee schedule changes, the code changes relating to medical marijuana, and lastly, in regards to firearm sales in residential zoning districts. Before we conclude, I want to thank Director Messer and his team, Michael Bowen, Anthony Celebrezzi, the professionals at CTV who work hard to make sure that we have these hearings on whenever that we are scheduling them, who work hard to prepare for and broadcast these committee hearings, Andrew Dwyer, who is our Senior Policy Advisor for the Council's Legislative Research Office, my team, Nicole Harper and Carl Williams, also my fellow council members and their staffs who work hard each and every day for the residents of Columbus, and most of all, thank you to the residents of Columbus who make our city the best place in the country to live, work, and to raise a family. Thank you, and the hearing is concluded.